once you become an entrepreneur, you also become very abundant. You become abundant about your time. No one else controls your time. You become abundant about your money. You can demand what you want. And I think that mindset shift just changes everything.
Hey, I'm Lisa Hugo, and I am obsessed with helping other people find their voices so they can go out and take on the world, be seen as an authority, an expert, and grow their business by sharing that knowledge and expertise with others. Now, I studied performing arts, and I spent 20 years of my career traveling the world as a professional singer-songwriter. I teach you the secrets to speak up and be heard, overcome your fears, and then use these skills to build a business and a life that you love and that could change both your own life and the lives of others. This is your one-stop shop for all things that are going to help you to build a life on your terms. This is Impact Through Voice. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Impact Through Voice podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Hugo, and I'm joined in the studio today by Simone Heng. Now, Simone is a professional public speaker. She speaks on human connection, and she's the author of the book, Let's Talk About Loneliness. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm just going to say welcome to the podcast, Simone.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's so lovely to be back in the UAE. I love it.
That's great. And it's so wonderful that you've taken the time to be here in this podcast.
Of course.
I know how busy your schedule is. Okay, let's talk about loneliness. I would like to know what inspired you to write this book.
Sure. So as you mentioned earlier, I'm a professional speaker by trade. And when I first made the transition from being in media, a broadcaster, into being a public speaker or an expert thought leader, credibility was a big thing that was a hurdle for me. I was 35, but looked probably about 12 when I started. And, you know, authority, the word author is an authority. So
True.
It was widely known in the industry that to have a book is a wonderful, wonderful way to gain credibility. And then we had a pandemic, so it was a perfect time to do it. But I think moreover, there is a lot of distillation of the thought leadership, my particular slant on the topic of human connection, that I was able to gain from the act of writing. So Adam Grant always says half of the thing about writing is that it helps you think and clarify your thought. And that is really what happened for me. So I started writing for very, very practical reasons. It was meant to be a business book. Obviously, it did not come out like a business book. If something
True,
took over my body But I had this intuitive sense that it was special. So I didn't muck around with it. I had a writing coach at the time, and I was so scared to publish it because it was so raw and personal and vulnerable. And I said, I don't even know if this is going to do anything for me for business because it's not a business book. Can I even sell this after my speeches, or what is the point of this? And the lady who was coaching me was also from an Asian background, American. And she said, the people that you fear rejecting this book, so my parents' generation, for example, they're not even going to read it. So if you're holding back from helping the women of your generation or the men of your generation who've experienced this kind of loneliness in relation to an immigrant upbringing, like if you're going to miss out on serving them because you're scared of this older generation that doesn't know about mental health and doesn't know about conscious parenting and all of this stuff, you're going to miss out serving a lot of people. And I don't think that should let it stop you. And so I pressed publish.
And good for you, because as I was just telling you before we got on the podcast today, I started reading the book last night. I planned to read it much earlier, but I dove in last night and I couldn't put it down. I felt such a strong connection with you, with your upbringing, growing up in Australia as well, very strict parents, and just the conversation that you had about the dynamic in the home, and so many things. And then your experience moving to Switzerland. Of course, I was telling you
you lived in that part of Europe
when I was 25 to live in Germany, and then traveled and lived in many different countries. So I felt a strong connection, and I will say it was even a very emotional experience for me reading this book. My father passed away from cancer as well.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So, no, it was just that connection with everything that you'd been through, and it brought up a lot of emotional reactions in me, and in a good way as well, because it gets you back thinking about how you felt about situations that I think you tend to block out.
Completely, because you're like, I'm a mum now, or I'm an adult now, I've got a business to run, and you're like, we only have time to move forward.
Exactly.
But I think a lot of, and I'm writing the second book now about the connection we have with ourselves. So it's like the prequel to the first book, which is about interpersonal connection. And I think a couple of things, I've been working on that manuscript while I've been in Dubai. That's really the reason I'm here. First thing that came up for me is how difficult it is to replicate that page turning thing. So that first book helped me to heal. And once you're healed in a really happy place, it's really difficult to bring yourself or to want to bring yourself back to a dark place, even though I know that the dark places are where the jewels are to connect with a reader, right? So that's been really challenging. And I think the second thing is this idea that even though we're moving forward, if we really want that big growth, we have to look at our childhood. We have to look at those things. I spent years running away from it and not looking at it. And I really wish that I had done that earlier. And my hope is that the book has inspired people to look at their own childhood.
Yeah. Well, if it did this for me, I'm sure it's done it for many other people as well. And so I think, I'm a bit in awe of you for putting so much of your personal journey into a book. And I'm curious to know, have your family read it? I know you say that the older generation are not going to read it, but what about your siblings?
I don't think my sister has read it. I sent her the first iteration of the book. I made it very much that she's not mentioned in it because she's a very successful corporate person. And so she's intentionally omitted from it because I don't want it to affect her career. But in terms of my parents, obviously my mum is no longer conscious and then my dad has passed away. And so I had this realization that if I'm going to be one of the first people from my generation of my ethnic background to speak up about these things, maybe some of the pain of losing my parents, maybe it happened so that good could come out of this, because in our culture, unless you were in my position, you would never write something like that. So if both of your parents were conscious and still around, you would never. Right. So I think everything conspired to make me the perfect conduit for this. Yeah. In a really bittersweet way.
There was a moment in the book that I read where, I know you've come from a background in radio where you were living the life, you were living the dream, and then to give all of that up to go back because your mother was in need of assistance and you needed to be there. And then you were clearing out the house. Now, this is something I think we all...
Everyone fears this.
Are fearful of, yeah.
And imagine being like 29, 30 years old doing it on your own.
I can't imagine what that was like for you.
It's only now, 10 years later, that my peers are going through this with their parents because they're now 40 and my parents had us very late. So we went through this earlier. And it's only now that I get empathy from people. At the time, everyone was getting engaged and getting married and it was so lonely, Lisa. Like they couldn't imagine what it is to be doing those kind of tasks. They were building their families.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing is I still wrestle with, I do a lot of personal development, go on a lot of retreats, and something that's coming up for me recently is the fact that I never questioned. I was culturally conditioned that the minute mum was like, I'm sick, wasn't even a question that you would stay in Dubai. Even though I now look back and think of what I built and where I could have been if I kept it going. But then at the same time, I don't think I would be emotionally as successful as I am now. This wisdom that I have now I would have bypassed it.
Yeah.
And I probably would be still hanging around here shopping for clothes, which would be a real waste of a mind, I tell you. But so it happened the way it was supposed to happen, but I do deal with some residual anger in that kind of Asian parenting of that generation that was like, if something happens to me, you give everything up, and that filial reverence, and you're conditioned from very young with that in a way that is unquestioning. But we now live in a very different world. And so part of me, it took me so many years to get back, not only back on track, but to thriving. So I would say the whole thing, giving up Dubai, mum, it was probably about 6 years before I felt normal again. And there was so much grief, and I'm writing about that in the next book. It's grief about losing a life, grief about seeing my mother ill, grief about seeing my childhood home in the way that it was with the hoarding disorder, and all these different forms of grief bundled into one whole snowball that sent me to therapy. But my point is that unresolved grief can really hijack our lives. And so the whole, I'm still dealing, like processing this kind of, now as a 40-year-old woman, if I had a young child, would I tell the child from young, if anything happens to me, you must give everything up to take care of me? I couldn't see myself doing that. But I also grew up in a Western context, which my mother didn't. My mother has her own stuff that she carries, like all of our parents have whatever generational trauma they're carrying.
Yeah.
And I live in a different cultural context. You know, I'm an entrepreneur where part of my DNA is outsourcing. Like, you know, you don't want to do that task, you pay someone to do it. So the thought of, you know, my contribution to the planet maybe have been bigger than hanging around a nursing home, that, you know, all of this 10, 15 years ago, we weren't talking about. So there's a lot that I still unpack from that time.
You talk about growing up in an Asian family, and that is sort of a stigma or things that are expected in that culture. But I think reading the book as well, I related a lot as well. I think I'm sure it's very much your culture, but it's also the generation of our parents. And there is a lot that I connected with the expectations of being the only girl in a family. Amongst three brothers, and the expectations on me. I remember my grandmother saying to me, I thank God the day you were born because your mother would have somebody to be there for her when she gets older. And I'll never forget those words.
Absolutely. I was in India speaking for International Women's Day, and I said, raise your hand here if you have brothers. They all put their hands up. I said, raise your hand here if when something happens with your parents, it defaults to your brothers to take care of it. Not one hand went up. It is the burden of girls. And I love that the book connected with you, because it was, when you write a self-published book, which it was before it was acquired, they get you, the book writing coach gets you to think of a target, you know, reader. Yep. And I never thought in a million years that it would go beyond that target reader. And it makes me so happy to know that it resonated with you. And gosh, it puts pressure on me. I hope the next one will do the same. Oh my gosh, I'm wrestling with the draft right now.
No, fully. So when it comes to writing a book, how do you get started?
So I think the way that I would love everyone to get started is to know that they have a deep burning message, not a story, not their story, a deep burning message that can impact and help the world. You shouldn't just write a book because. And that is something I've learned, that once you become a published author, and if your book does quite well, they want to commission you for a second book or whatever. And then it's like writing for the sake of writing, because it becomes commercial, right? But the initial impetus for the first book should be because you have something burning to say. And I have a girlfriend who's very wise, and she's a multiple author, and she says, I don't need to pump out a book every year. I only want to write a book when I feel I have something to say. And what's really fascinating about like the narcissism of the world we live in now is like when people I know, not close friends, but outside of that orbit, know that I've written a book, the second thing is I want to write a book. It's not congratulations on writing a book. It's like I want to write a book. And I think that just says, firstly, the human condition is that we all want to be seen and validated. There's a part of us, right, in that. But you do get to a point where you have been seen or validated. Like my whole career, like I can't wait to disappear. I can't imagine the narcissism I had in my 20s being a radio DJ. Like I did not have any more steam in me. I was internally bankrupt. So anyone who makes it to a level of being like household name, you've got to really have a level of love in yourself to the plus that I actually at this stage as a middle-aged person don't actually really understand. I can't wait to set up an arm of my business here in Dubai where I get to be invisible. Like I'm very excited about that.
Does that mean you're planning to come back to Dubai? Or
I want a time split because our slow period in Singapore, which is end of November through to Chinese New Year, February, is the peak season in Dubai. So it could have been more perfectly because last year, that period of time in Singapore, I was like twiddling my thumbs. Although this year it's a lot busier. So I guess with professional speaking, we can never really tell. It's a little bit, but you know, for me to have Australian residency, Singapore permanent residency, and then to try and get some sort of residency here was my dream. It's my dream. And then I spend a lot of time in Switzerland because I get booked by a lot of Swiss private banks. So then I get to revisit all my loved ones around the world. It's a global family. It's like it was always my dream. For someone who had such filial loneliness growing up, to have built a global family, and then the pain of not being able to see them regularly, to now be able to see them regularly.
And be paid to do it.
And someone else pays the business class ticket. It's a huge blessing. Of course, it doesn't make dating very easy, but it certainly was my dream. And so I think anyone is lucky to live their dream life once in their life, and you get to do it a second time, like go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And enjoy it while you have the freedom.
And while you have the energy to do it.
Yeah.
Because honestly, at this point at 40, the flying, like doing a keynote 7 to 16 hours jet lagged, you're like an athlete. Like the running I do on the treadmill. And that's why I also share about it in my IG stories, because I don't want anyone to think it's just so glamorous without. You have to have a certain level of memory, cognition, brain health, physical health to do global speaker life. Like that isn't, not enough people told me about that.
Yeah.
The physical part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I had on the podcast a few weeks back, don't know if you know him, David J.P. Phillips.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
yes.
He was on the podcast a few weeks
Dubai?
back. Yes, he was.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I read his book High on Life as well. I don't know if you've read it.
When I started my career, I've met David actually. When I started my career, I read his Death by PowerPoint to learn how to do my slides.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he talks about a very similar experience where he's constantly traveling one place to the next, and he would much rather be in the basement of his house.
He's also introverted, whereas I'm an extroverted.
Yeah.
So it can be very draining for introverts.
But interesting to see how, and you'll be able to talk about this, as a public speaker, it's not about your personality, it's about the skill.
Yeah, it's not about your story, it's not about your personality. Everyone that I bump into from radio around the world that used to know me from radio is like, you know, you're always so charismatic. And I say, but everyone in entertainment is charismatic. You think charisma is enough for someone to book you for those kind of fees, to send you to the other side of the world? You have to add insight. You're not a speaker, you're a thought leader. And that is, your currency is thoughts. So the smarter I get and the more learning I do, whether that's by, you know, there's never not a day that I'm not reading someone else's books, fiction, non-fiction, whatever it is. But one thing that happened in my entertainment career is I got really dumb really fast. And I literally recently got tested, and I am neurodivergent. So I think a lot of the success I've had as a speaker is like my brain horsepower is a little bit different. I don't get overwhelmed the way other people would by doing social media marketing and then doing long form and then writing a book and then doing speech. Like it doesn't fatigue me the way it does a non-neurodivergent person. But that element of the thought in Thought Leader, I cannot emphasize that enough, that you have a topic that you add specialist insight that is different to anyone else speaking on that topic. That's the money card. That's what they bring you out for. It's got nothing to do with your story, unless you are Michael Jordan or a very big celebrity or a very well-known entrepreneur that has, you know, household name value.
Yeah. When you started in radio, how did you get into radio? What was that step to go from where you were in Australia in Perth to then getting into broadcasting? So
in 2005, my dad had died the year before, and I just had a massive existential crisis. So if you don't know the story, my father was a Singaporean immigrant who was a shopkeeper and spent like 7 days a week behind the shop counter, and then died at 60 and never made it to his retirement. Sorry. And that was a big mess. Like, I was 21, but that was a punch in the face, I thought.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
You know, do you want to live in Perth, Western Australia your whole life? Do a job that the market has available, because it's not a media hub, it's not an arts hub, it's not an entertainment hub. I don't even know what it is a hub for, right? And do you want to stay here, or do you want to go and do what you love with this one life that is finite? And so I started out commercial modeling in Asia, and then I got a gig as a VJ for a music channel. It was very big at the time, music, you know, like MTV, Channel V, all these things. And And that's kind of how it started. And then I got a gig. I was always doing television. And I went into radio because Singapore was getting increasingly expensive. So I couldn't survive just on the TV. I wanted to do radio as a full-time gig, and that was the only full-time job in entertainment. So I'm a visual person. I wasn't a naturally auditory person, which many radio presenters are. They think in soundscapes. I don't. I think in stories and pictures, for sure. And so it was not a great fit, but it was a pragmatic fit. And then the head of Virgin Radio International was in China at the time, trying to open up the China station. And I was on HBO doing the movie channel. And they were specifically looking for people of color. Oh, we say that now, people of color. We didn't have the words for that before. But they were looking for people of color who had a Western accent. And so they reached out to me, and by total coincidence, I also was in radio, but they didn't know that. They saw it on television. And that was the first boss who brought me out to Dubai in 2008. Yeah. It's a crazy story. And the funny thing is, that stuff happens to me all the time. So once you've unblocked that internal work, the speed with which you call in, that was rogue for that time because I had a lot of work to do. But now that I've really unblocked, there's not a day that, even here I came to write my manuscript and now we're currently back and forth with a gig in Abu Dhabi. You know, I can see something and think, wouldn't that be nice? It's never, I want that, or that is mine, or I feel entitled to that. But it's like, oh, wouldn't that be nice?
So
and then
you
it happens.
approach, or you go out looking for opportunities, or they come to you?
They come to me. I stopped hustling when I left entertainment. I was like, I'm done with this kind of desperate, insecure energy that environment breeds. And once you become an entrepreneur, you also become very abundant. You become abundant about your time. No one else controls your time. You become abundant about your money. You can demand what you want. And I think that mindset shift just changes everything. And so I just say, oh, I would like this. And then but I do show up on my socials. So I do 5 times a week LinkedIn, 5 times a week Instagram.
Yep, I've seen you out there.
Yep. And I stopped doing TikTok because it was just not converting for me. And so I do what I can, and then we see what comes to me. I don't do any, a lot of speakers do like Google ads for their website and all that. I don't do any of that. I just focus on insight so that if I do put something up, it's different in thought to what you might have seen in the mass about my topic or about my culture or my story. It's very insightful, and that's what a client wants to see. So it's not about numbers, it's more quality of insight.
And it's authentic and it's very personal.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that personal. I don't share I only share things from the past. So things that I'm going through right now, there's a saying in speaking, you should never use the stage for your catharsis. Like the stage is not yours for therapy. And so I take that to socials as well. Like I'm not there to talk about the bad date I went on the other day and tell every detail. You know, we're not here for that, right? Yeah. But things that I've distilled the lesson down to, like a lot of things in my childhood, I feel like we've done enough work that there is lessons for other people to get value from. But I spent 15 years in media talking about fluff and rubbish. Like I write about in the book, I feel I squandered the gift of this brain and this mouth on fluff, and God help me, I'm not going to do that for the rest of my life. So if it's not insightful, if it's not adding value, it doesn't go up.
I love that. But I also think...
That's very Singaporean to me. I got really intense there.
I think that we have to work through something first and find a resolution, find our outcome before we can share it.
Yeah.
You can't share when you're in the midst of something and you don't even know where it's going to go for you. Yeah.
And we've all watched those TED Talks where someone's in the midst of it, just sharing without resolution, sharing without preparation. And every moment you get to be on a stage, be it a digital stage or an in-person stage, is an absolute privilege. One day the stages will run out for me too. I won't be considered a future thinker anymore. I'll be considered an auntie. And no one will want me on their podcast or their stage. And that's part of like life and the acceptance of life, right? And so we should treat every opportunity as an honor. And don't betray our audience by lack of preparation or lack of distillation of a message. Yeah, that's my thinking.
I fully agree with you on that one. Yeah. So you did a TED Talk, speaking of TED.
Yeah, I've done a couple. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm interested to know how important is it for you to get a TED, because I think it's a big honor to be on the TED stage, and the preparation that goes into a TED is immense from people I've spoken with. And
yeah, I mean, I think we need to define first the difference between a TED and a TEDx. So I have some peers in the US who've been on the TED stage, which is where they do it in California, Silicon Valley, and that is the OG TED where you have to be selected. And then there's just TEDx's, which are kind of mushroomed everywhere. And so I am just the TEDx kind. I'm nothing special, but I think that the reason why everyone is big about a TEDx is because if it does go viral, like David J.P. Phillips, one of his went viral, it can really help your cause or your message or your business, right?
Absolutely.
But for me, it's more if people approach, which for both of them, they came to me. And then I feel like, oh, okay, so I have a possibility to enrich and share a message, and so I should do this. But I don't... there are loads of professional speakers who don't have a TEDx. For me, a TEDx is a beautiful opportunity to share an idea worth spreading, which is the motto.
Yes.
It is not there for your therapy. It's not there for you to procure business by pitching. It's a very special medium of its own. And the more times you spend learning about speech writing, learning about rhetoric, learning about all of these things, you realize it really is a medium of its own. I've seen videos of people who treat the TEDx like it's a training, like with the flip chart and stuff. You know, that's not the spirit of TEDx. So my advice to anyone who is lucky enough to get it is please do your research on what it is first before going in and doing like a Shark Tank business pitch or, you know.
Of course.
That's, yeah. And if you get a really good TEDx curation team, they'll guide you on that.
But see, you are already a professional speaker, so you have a multitude of different talks that you can just go out and speak on because you've done it so many times. For somebody who would be given the opportunity to do a TEDx and they are not so well known and haven't got that much experience to be on the stage, it's just a great opportunity to share a message, then a lot more has to go into the messaging, the way you prepare from everything. I know David, who we were talking about, goes right down into every minute body language.
Yeah, I mean, you should rehearse like 300 times. So I would say the first one that I did, you can watch the first one, which was 6 years ago, and you can watch the one that I did in September. There's a huge difference. So the first one, I hadn't studied speech writing yet. I was telling way too many stories. Frankly, they're both a bit long. They're both 17, 18 minutes, which is a maximum length.
Yes.
You could do a lot shorter. But I did a lot more prep for the first one because I wasn't actively speaking on stages and I was at the start of my business. And I have always thought since then if I had a chance to do this again, and then I got a chance to do this again. It was so wonderful. I'm really proud of the second one, but the second one was internal for a multinational corporation. So I had to actually scrub their logo from the back of it to put it on YouTube.
Right.
So it was just seen within the closed doors. I would say my biggest advice about the TEDx, if you get the chance to do it, is firstly rehearse. Do the blocking. You know, I did theatre as a minor at university, so I know a lot about staging, which has been a real advantage because, you know, speaking is a full body sport. Don't get it
full on.
Don't get it twisted. You know, like people who become speakers from coaches or authors may not be as embodied as somebody like me, or maybe you, when you were a singer, you know how to use a stage, right? So the non-verbal element is really important. And with a TEDx, because it's short, the attention to detail, memorization, the reason they get you to memorize a TEDx is because the brevity. You don't have the fat to mess around with.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no fat to mess around with. You have to say what you mean the first time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And get it right the first time. And because once you get nervous, other influences come into your brain. You get foggy, you get nervous, you get that you have to be able to do it as if you'd be doing it in your sleep. No,
absolutely.
That well.
So my measure of that is always like, can you recite your speech while washing the dishes?
Yeah.
That's how you know it's part of your skin. And once it's part of your skin, you can then layer on the other elements. I have an ebook in my Instagram links, which is the 8 Ways to Fight Stage Fright. It's a free ebook, and it goes through all of the different things that I do to calm my nervous system, because there's a critical amount of of stress hormones. So we need adrenaline and testosterone, performance hormones, to do well. But those performance hormones, when we're in a fight or flight state, before, which some people call stage fright, we are also dealing then with some other hormones that come with the testosterone and adrenaline that can sabotage us. And so the whole point of those biohacking or those exercises in that ebook is to reduce the negative effects of the fight or flight response and lift those performance ones so that we're not at that shaking, dry throat, sweating kind of place. We're in a place where we feel we can handle the challenge, but we still need the testosterone and adrenaline to do well.
Yes.
Yeah. So
if we want to put that in the show notes for others too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can we do that? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Before you go out on stage, do you have a ritual? What do you do?
Yeah. I always, no matter where I am in the world, and I recently forgot it because I did 7 countries in 2.5 weeks, and the trip to Korea, I forgot to pack it, but it's absolutely imperative, is your vocal care. So I bring Manuka honey, Chinese green tea bags, and a flask. And that flask comes all the way with me till before I get on stage, because sometimes you've got other speakers in front of you where you can't do vocal warm-ups and they've sat you in the front row. But by sipping this mixture, it is almost like a vocal warm-up that I'm doing silently, right? And it helps for vocal care. I also love, if I can, do a really aggressive run the morning of the speech, because it really moves my body and gets everything flowing. That's really important. And I travel all over the world with a foam pillow because I have some neck issues, and that makes sure I get good sleep, because that mental sharpness when you're trying to do a great speech and not blank is really, really important. But I would say the vocal cares, it's important.
Interesting, because I am very much into voice, coming from a singing background, and I coached in singers, I coached then speakers in voice. And I often ask this question, what's your vocal warm-up if you have one? So if you do a vocal warm-up, if you have the opportunity, what kind of exercises do you do?
I do humming. I can sing too, probably nothing on your level for sure, but like I will sing along to some of my favorite songs and difficult ones like a Chris Isaac, Crazy. That helps, especially when you're jet lagged. So if I'm doing something in another time zone, my voice can fall asleep. But the most important thing, and it's in the ebook, is I do a 4-4-8 breathing technique, which is like a box breathing. Because Caroline Goyder, who's a friend of mine, one of the world's most famous voice coaches, she'll tell you the most powerful person in the room is the person with the most calm breath. So if you go up there and you're all up here in your clavicles and you are tight, your audience will mirror you because of mirror neurons. They will be as nervous as you. And then you make them tense. So they want to see you win. So you need to go up like Obama. And when you're an Asian woman and you're 5'1", you know, sometimes I walk into a room and it's an audience of men much older than me, from all different parts of the world, and maybe there's hardly any women in the room, and it can be very intimidating. But the trick of it is to look like it's not intimidating and it's J-Lo at the Super Bowl. And this is what I always say to myself, this is what you do. This is what you do for a living. This is your thing. So just go and do your thing. And that helps to make the event feel less, I guess, of an outlier. Yeah. I mean, when I went to speak at Harvard, that was the one that I was most nervous, because you're in a room of, they're not even your peers, they're above my peers, right? They're the people who do all the studies for all of the things that I speak on. And so that was really intimidating. That one got me. Yeah, that was, I mean, it went perfectly fine, but I rehearsed that like a TEDx. That was my TEDx. Yeah.
I think most people say that when they are put in a room and everybody in that room is a level above them in knowledge and experience, that's when it gets the most nerve-wracking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I want to go back to the book and talking about human connection and what we're experiencing in today's age with digital technology, digital lives. Our younger generation, my kids are just growing up constantly on their phones. Everything is texting their friends. And where are we headed with human connection?
So, fantastic book that I'd recommend everyone listening who has teenagers to read is Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. He talks about something called asynchronous communication. So your kids have grown up with asynchronous communication. That means they have 48 to 72 hours or a week to mediate a text response back. They're not speaking in real time. They are not having serendipitous moments of human connection. And all of those things, the things that we grew up with in analog childhood, the making witty banter and all of that, that requires a level of social agility. Now, if you don't get practice doing that, and then someone comes to you with a difficult conversation in the workplace, so you're a Gen Z, you enter the workplace and like your boss wants to talk to you or give you critique.
Yep.
Of course you're going to be anxious. Of course you're not going to know what to do because you've always had time to mediate your response. So this is something that I would say to parents, if you have kids, get them into synchronous activities like playing sports or singing in the choir, or when we do things in sync with other human beings, we tap into how we evolved as early Homo sapiens. We lived in tribes and we chanted together and played drums together and did murals in the cave together and hunted together. And so we developed mirror neurons where literally our biology syncs up with another human being. And this is part of the feeling of deep connection that Gen Z often says they don't experience. So that is very, very worrying. And Haidt also says that basically social media should be not available. Like what we've seen in Australia at 16, social media has been bad. Like that should be global. And I think that he makes a really persuasive argument for this in his book. Yeah.
I find, I've seen 2 kids grow up with social media. I probably made the mistake of giving them their very first iPod when they were about 5 or 6 years old. So they had that ability to, first of all, just play games and be on a device. It was controlled. And then giving them a phone, maybe they were 11, but we wanted them to be able to contact us. So initially it wasn't it was just a regular Nokia style phone where they just could dial it or they could play some very, very simple games. But now, once they're in their teenage years, I find it very hard to say at the age of 16 or below 16, you're 100% banned from being on social media. I think in some ways it's important because that's where the whole world is going as well, to be connected through devices. It's regulating it.
Yeah, I think any parent should not feel bad that, we had no precedent. But what we do have a precedent now, because we've seen what happened with social media, is we have a precedent for AI. So the new wave that we should all be looking at is, and that's what my TEDx was about, is AI companions. So we've seen a 14-year-old boy already commit suicide based off his AI companion prompting him or suggesting him to do so. So we have a very interesting intersection in the culture. If you have someone who's lonely, the lonely brain has different boundaries, as you've been reading in my book, right? So the lonely brain's perception of reality is not the same as all of our perception of reality. And so therefore things like Kindroid, Replica, Xiaobing in China, Glow app, all of these kind of AI companion apps, they were not designed for lonely people, but of course lonely people are the low-hanging fruit to grab them. Yeah, and busy people who don't feel they don't have time for connection. And I'm not saying they're wholly bad, but when you don't have boundaries because you're lonely, being addicted to that can cause some issues. And we've seen obviously the first suicide now based off of this. So if there's anything to take from what we didn't do well with social media unregulated, is we demand regulation of the companies building these AI companion apps. But it's very, very difficult. You think you as a mum having issue regulating 16-year-olds. How do we regulate tech companies who are creating generative AI? And so it all comes back, which is why I'm writing about self-connection in the next book, is knowing ourselves so we can be better for our children or better for our spouse. And having that self-knowledge is the only way to go intuitively. Have I hit a boundary here? Am I on this app too much? Do I need to stop? Because I very much doubt the people creating these things, when there's money at play and it's commerce, are going to do that for us. And we've seen that with social media and the infinity scroll. And with something like AI, it goes beyond borders. Digital products go beyond borders. So it becomes very, very difficult to regulate between countries. What Australia's doing probably is going to work because of the isolation of Australia and the fact that it's its own market. And China does that too. When I go to speak in China, I can't get access to any of my Google apps no YouTube, nothing.
Well, even here in the UAE, they regulate a lot.
Yeah, WhatsApp, you can't call out, all this
Yeah.
sort of stuff. So let's put that regulation not around commerce, but let's put that regulation around keeping our people safe.
Yeah.
That's what I would love governments to do.
So if I think back to my upbringing, my childhood, and probably you can relate to this as well, we were out, we were doing activities, we were barely home. I was out at piano lessons, I was at
Yeah.
gymnastics training, I was in the choir, I was in the musicals, and there was no device. So you were constantly kept physically active, mentally active. And so this is what I see, the big difference with the new generations coming in. And then I look at my parents' age group, where my mother lost my father 12 years ago. But instead of just wallowing into loneliness and her own self-pity and grief, she is out she's playing in a band, she's in the choir, she's 85 years old, she's in the Welsh choir, she's in the band, she's in craft activities, she's meeting up with people constantly. And she said to me the other day, I'm doing this because I know I have to, because the minute I stop this, I know it will be over for me.
So that's a bit of self-connection there, but I wonder and I theorize whether the boomers know how to self-regulate because they're born during a period of, post-war period. I don't know whether Gen Z regulates as well or younger, because why would you have to regulate when the minute you feel the pain of rejection, you can just keep swiping? Why would you have to learn to regulate when or have patience or resilience when you can just order food directly to your house? It's a much more frictionless childhood.
Yes.
Right? Than what anyone born into a post-war period would have dealt with. There would have been scarcity, some abundance, but also scarcity. And so I think that generation is very aware of connection and how it improves your immunity and your mental health and extends your lifespan and all these things. And they are very different. And I don't think we can compare any of the generations, even though people want to. I think what we need to do is look at what's happening now and how we can make it better, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think if I look towards my future, that's something I worry about. And also hearing the story of your mother, that's not that far ahead of me when all of this happened to your mum and your parents. And where am I going to be headed with emotional connection and connection if the whole world is taking this new route? What's going to happen to the next older generation and the healthcare systems, the governments to be able to manage?
I think governments globally have realised that loneliness is a global epidemic. It's not spoken about much in Dubai. It's been quite interesting to me that my book sold very well here, but yet how people are not aware of it's news to them. But in other parts of the world and the other governments of the world, they're already putting structures in place because loneliness will cause a massive public healthcare crisis because it leads to cardiovascular disease. Julian Holt-Lundstad, who I sit on a board with, she came up with the factoid that loneliness is more dangerous than smoking 15 cigarettes a day and alcohol use disorder or obesity. And you'll see that quoted a lot, that's from her. And we know that because loneliness, your body goes into a fight or flight state. It's the perception that you're separated from your tribe, and the tribe kept us safe. That's how human beings thrived beyond any of the other species, right? So it's baked into us to want to be in connection. But the way we live now with the conditions of modernity, we do not live in that village tribe environment anymore.
At all.
And so what this means is for huge plunging birth rates in Asia, actually the world over except for West Africa. West Africa is the only place that has a positive growth in birth rates. You're going to see, therefore, public healthcare systems having to nurse single people, not unlike myself. So, therefore, this has all got a public health flow-on effect. And we are seeing this. And, if you listen to the BBC and they talk about this birth rate thing, AI, I talk about this in my new material, AI is actually going to, for me, cause further polarization between us because the algorithms adapt to your own preferences and your own opinions. So you're being shown back your preferences and opinions to yourself, but also if you use AI companions, they're also going to be agreeing with you. So if we have mass dissemination of AI companions agreeing with our own opinion all the time, we're going to have a huge issue getting over moments of friction with another person that disagrees with us. You see?
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are all really fascinating trends to look into. And I think the role of my work, and particularly the second book, is like, how do we as a society combat that? And I just keep coming back to the individual. So the only way you put down that phone is down to you. Like the only way you don't download that app is down to you.
So I want to tap into loneliness and how does one know if they are lonely? Because I think it can be deceiving, right?
Yeah, especially if you don't have a high level of self-connection, which is what I'm writing about next. So here are some signifiers that you could be lonely. You're holding your friends to a much higher standard than is necessary. And I went through this a lot during the end of my time in Dubai, where somebody cancels on you and they have good reason to, but you take it really personally. And they're a good friend.
Okay.
And they don't cancel often. But for you, as a feeling of like, oh, they're
So
not a good friend, I'm going to cut them off. Yeah.
Not someone who just doesn't
Not the
show
normal
up.
Dubai flakes.
Exactly.
Not the standard Dubai flakes, like somebody who's a good friend. You're oversharing. So I also experienced this a lot towards the end of my time in Dubai. So it's the brain's perception of, I don't know when is the next time I'm going to meet somebody to disclose to. So I'm just going to meet anyone and tell my whole life story. Other things that happen is the lonely brain creates a self-isolating spiral. So what you could find is, like your mum knows she should go out. She knows it's good for her and it is a labor for her. What we're seeing, particularly younger generations with the whole order in the food, watch the Netflix at home by yourself with your dog, is knowing they should go out on some level, but isolating further. Or when you do go out, you feel totally overwhelmed and exhausted. That's a big, I think a lot of Gen Zs on TikTok say I'm introverted. But it's like, no, your social skills might have just atrophied because of a pandemic and you might actually really like enjoying people. You just need to push through it a little bit. So there are many, many things. Oh, and, misreading of social cues. So ironically, lonely people, obviously, because they're out of practice, become a little bit socially awkward. And therefore, just at the time that you need to be charming and you need to do whatever to build more connection, you're awkward. And then the person goes, oh my God, you're a bit awkward.
Right.
I don't want to give you my phone number, like blah, blah, blah. So I think your mum's idea of like staying in the game is really important. Otherwise you enter that loop.
Yep.
Yeah.
When I was in my younger years, my 20s, and I'd just gone across to Europe to travel as a singer, and I was on my own and I was staying in hotel rooms for years. I was every month in a different city in a different hotel room. And if I think about that now, and this came up by reading your book, that I was probably very lonely at that time, and I would make connections with people who were not good connections for me. And just because I craved attention, I craved to be liked, I craved connection with people. I was so far away from my family, and back then you couldn't just pick up the phone and call someone. You had to go and buy a phone card that you would then, cost 12 dirhams D-mark back in the day, and you would get 2 minutes on the phone with your parents, and you'd I've got to be quick, but it was just a matter of hearing their voice. Yeah, you would know from the time that you were
17 in Switzerland. It was like that still.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we moved to fax, so it was written, and then eventually we had email, and you could get a faster response from people. But that time I was probably very lonely, and I never would have put that word on it, I'm lonely, because I was out sort of living a party life and experiencing all kinds of different exciting moments. Distractions, yeah.
I think there's a huge misconception that you can be surrounded by people or be glamorous and not be lonely. Loneliness is the perception of the gap between the kind and amount of human connection you want and the kind and amount of human connection you're getting. So I spend a lot of time traveling, but I'm never lonely because I really love solitude. In fact, that's what makes me worried about eventually finding a partner and having a child, which I know will probably happen, is that the amount of solitude now that I need is so high that having people in that space all the time would be quite an adjustment for me. We're also wired as we get older to need less connection. And I'm going to just breathe into a few things that you said. So firstly, you're in your 20s, your prefrontal cortex is not even solidified yet. So you doing that in your 20s and not realizing that's the whole point of not having a solidified prefrontal cortex, is you're not meant to know. So don't feel bad about that. 21 years old, I moved to Asia to be in the entertainment industry. I was exactly the same. It wasn't really till I got to Dubai, 24 years old, 25, that I started to be learning lessons. So don't feel bad about that. The other thing is as well, we're wired for promiscuous connection in our 20s because that is the biology of our ancestors, the time in which they would have paired off and made babies. So you are wired to want all the shiny, exciting things and go clubbing, and you got the energy to do it. And then boom, your body goes, you're 40 now. You should have found your partner by now. And now we're going to reduce your energy and your social battery. And you're just going to be like, meh, I'm going home. Happened to me the other night. I was at Le Petit Maison. I went for old time's sake, shits and giggles. And then I was like, it's 10:30. I know you all want to stay here till 2:30. Habibti, good night. Thank you so much. And I was out of there. Yeah.
That is so true. What
So,
you can tolerate and enjoy when you're younger. And I guess our body makes that happen
our
based
body
on...
is part of the mental health conversation, and I think like having that compassion. But I think also I know so much about it because I've spent over half a decade studying it, and then the general person doesn't know, and they have these moments of self-loathing or regret, and they shouldn't. The biology wasn't batting on your team at that time. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, and you should be so happy that you had that time.
True.
Do you feel happy that you had that time?
There are moments when now as a mother and being married for 20 years, I think to myself, wouldn't it be so nice just to have some of that solitude again?
Yeah. So I kind of think about my Jane Bond lifestyle in the same way. I think years from now, I will regret not being present. So the wonderful thing about having a second wind, if anyone is listening who's had a second wind in their career. So I had, one career where I got to do radio and entertainment, and now we've had a second wind, is that if you get that second chance, you are so much more present and grateful for everything. So when I am on a business class flight, I am fully there. I'm in it. I've done the work before I got on the plane so that I can fully enjoy the trip and be there for my client and really listen to my audience and connect with my audience. And I think all of these things are just so important so that we don't feel that we're always chasing or wanting more or missing out. Going back to my dad's story, you just get one life. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your dad was a great inspiration.
Oh, he still is. I was just in Barcelona and told his story, and a man came up at the end, and this gentleman burst out crying, and he said, Simone, I'm following you on Instagram, and, I have a daughter, and if she ever stood up on a stage and honored me the way that you did with your dad, I would die a happy man. And I was like, wow. Again,
Moving.
When I started speaking, I didn't realize that these sorts of stories would be as universal as they were, but it's kind of wonderful. I never felt this connection to people when I was in media. It's different. Making people laugh and talking about superficial things, there is a connection there, and they'll love you for it, but they don't really know you.
Yeah.
Whereas what I do now, I feel that the mask is down, which is wonderful. Vulnerability is how we connect with people.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So rewarding.
So rewarding.
Simone, it's been amazing having you on. Thank you so much for sharing so much of you. Thank you for opening your book to me and giving me that opportunity to learn more about your life, but also learn more about myself at the same time. And for anybody wanting to read your books, where can we find them?
You can put my name into Amazon and both of them will come up. But the version, which is the newer version, the international version, is Let's Talk About Loneliness. And it's at all of your major kind of retailers around the world. Yeah.
And I've seen it's on the shelves here in Dubai as well.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for the new book.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Impact Through Voice podcast. Now, if you've reached the end of this episode, then it means you're enjoying the podcast. So I have a quick favor to ask. If you haven't yet subscribed, please go and do it now and even leave us a review, because it really does help us so much to reach more people and impact more people. And I would be very, very grateful. Now, I love to read all of your comments about the show and what you're enjoying, what you would like to hear more of. So please take the time and go and do that now. When you do that, please take a screenshot and then tag me on Facebook or Instagram. That's Lisa Hugo Official. I'm going to be sure to share your post, and I'm also going to private DM you with a thank you. And it also means you won't miss an episode. And as a subscriber, then you're going to get access to more content that we don't even open up to everybody. So thanks again. And until next time, keep on working towards your goals and making a positive impact on the world with your voice.